a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. One day right now in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream.
Welcome to the Ambassador Podcast, a resource created by a community of Christians seeking to represent God to a watching world in humility, unity, and boldness. Our goal is to educate, be educated, encourage, be encouraged, challenge, and be challenged as we pursue a heavenward perspective of God's heart for racial equity and reconciliation rooted in the gospel of Jesus Christ.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Ambassador. My name is Tracy. I am one of the co-hosts here. And today we're doing stories, and why not start with Jarryd? So Jarryd, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. My name is Jarryd. I am originally from Kansas City, Missouri, the real Kansas City. A lot of people always ask, where are you from, right? I say Kansas City, like Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri. I'm like, definitely Missouri, the real Kansas City, right? Yeah. We got the Chiefs, we got the Royals, we got the barbecue.
314 day?
What's that?
314 day?
314
or 413?
Day. 816.
816?
Come on, wow.
Jump in like she knew.
I was like, yeah, you got this. No.
816.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, anyway, man, born and raised Kansas City. I played basketball. Played basketball all my life growing up. Played basketball at an early age, not too early. I started playing in middle school, so about 12, 13 years old. Really got into it, started playing AAU, and that took off pretty quickly. Got a chance to play for this team called Rocktown. They're called MoCan now. People who hear this and they know AAU basketball, they'll know that name. And so we got to travel around the country, played in almost probably every country or every state in the country. And so all over the place from 6th grade until 11th grade. Ended up getting my first scholarship offer in 8th grade to the University of Missouri. I was from Missouri, so I wanted to stay home, be a hometown kid, wanted to actually go play for that college. Quinn Snyder was the coach at the time, and we had a great relationship. I went there for team camps, elite camps. He just treated me really, really well. And so saw myself being a Missouri Tiger. I wanted to commit. My family wouldn't let me. We were trying to mull over some ideas. Sophomore year of high school rolls around. More offers are pouring in, more letters are pouring in. And, I'm still thinking University of Missouri, I want to be a Tiger. Sophomore year summer rolls around and Quinn Snyder actually gets fired. So that wisdom from my family, my parents, to hold off and just wait was correct, right? So when the young athletes there looking to commit too early, just hold off, just hold on, wait a minute. But anyway, ended up, so I had some offers come in, Kansas State, Virginia, Nebraska, Minnesota, and, some of those interests kind of waned off because it was a rumor mill I was going to go to Missouri anyway. But by junior year, I had a chance to come up to Iowa City, Iowa. University of Iowa Hawkeyes. Go Hawks, baby. And I went to the elite camp there, performed really, really well, ended up going to the hotel after one night of camp. Steve Alford was the coach at the time. He invited me to come up to his suite at the hotel. He had all the assistant coaches there. The managers were there. I believe Gary Barta, the athletic director, was there. And they offered me a scholarship on the spot. So right then and there, University of Iowa was black and gold, just like University of Missouri. So I felt really at home, People always ask me, what made you choose Iowa? I was like, it felt like home, It felt good. And so went home, kind of made the decision pretty early. I went up there with my high school coach and basically made the decision on the drive back, Talked to my parents and said, hey, this is what I want to do. It was junior year. That was your last year being able to play AAU basketball anyway, getting that recognition and exposure. And so went ahead, I think a few days passed, and I was able to call up Steve Alford and say, hey, I made my decision. I want to be a Hawkeye. So gave him my verbal commitment, signed my letter of intent, and was a Hawkeye by 2007. So spent 4 years at the University of Iowa. Man, I was involved in a lot of the ministries there, FCA, just involved in that, leading out in that. And
So
I
you came
wasn't
in as a believer?
came in as a believer, gave my life to Christ at a really young age. I was about 10 or 11, gave my life to Christ. I was raised in the church with the family. Grew up in a Southern Black Baptist context, so a lot different than where I'm at right now, right? Gave my life to Christ, professed Jesus Christ, was baptized. And so, yeah, lived that life out. I was a part of, it was crazy. So where I lived in Kansas City, I was back and forth. I was stuck in the middle of some sorts, right? Grew up with a Black family. And then so we hung around mostly other Black families, right? But then I also went to school in more of a predominantly white or mixed environment. And so I was always in and out of these two cultures trying to, fit in and make sense of them both, So I would on Sundays, I would go to this all-Black church, Mount Washington Bible Baptist Church, right? And then I'd go to Antioch Bible Baptist, an all-white church, basically, for Awanas on Wednesday nights, all growing up through elementary school, middle school. And that was kind of that rhythm there. In high school, I started leading this inner city ministry down in Kansas City. We would drive around, we'd pick up these kids around the area, take them to this church called City Church, and we just do Thursday night Bible studies with those kids, and it was amazing, so life-giving. Got to college in 2007. Like I said, a part of the FCA ministry there, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And it was amazing. Jim Goodrich was out there, took us under his wing. As athletes, you don't have a lot of time to really do anything. Your time is owned by the university, right? And so the time that I was able to give to FCA was precious time, Jim was amazing, man. He made it a point to actually come to our dorm rooms. He would come to Carver Hawkeye Arena, set up in the locker rooms, and just pull out the Bible, read a scripture. It was a really good time, really formational time there. So freshman year, playing at University of Iowa, it is 8 games in. I've worked my way up to be a starter, playing really well. And 8 games in is about 1 or 2 games before Big Ten play. So we're playing preseason play right now. We're at home. We're down by 1 point. I remember like it was yesterday, man. I'm setting a screen and roll like I've done a million times before, right? Really simple basketball play, setting the screen and roll on the side, rolling to the basket, getting that dump down from my man, Justin Johnson. Shout out to my man from Texas, Persia.
I love him, whoever he is.
Hit her up. Nah, but man, hit me on that pick and roll, man. Stopped in the middle of the paint, took off. I remember it was late in the first half. Felt like I was screaming for a minute straight, right? Because I jumped up, I was excited, I was screaming, I dunked the basketball, I'm still screaming with that emotion, I'm coming down, and I land on the ground and just tweak my knee just enough to get those ligaments in my knee, right? And so I'm screaming for a minute straight, right? First from the adrenaline, the excitement coming down, now it's the pain. And it's so crazy, didn't step on anybody's foot, didn't step on the ball, there was no object under there. And it was just so crazy how it happened. It was a freak accident. I call it that all the time. It had to have been. And so, I couldn't put any more pressure on my leg. And so immediately I feel that snap, I hear that snap, and I hop a couple times. There's a video on YouTube somewhere, and I fall on the ground, holding my knee, screaming. First to come to me, John Streif. If you've been to University of Iowa, if you're an athlete at University of Iowa in particular, you would know John Streif and you love John Streif. And so he was there, man, and he was telling me, first thing he says to me, everybody would know this, it's not good, bud. It's not looking good, bud. And so it turned out that game, 8 games in, freshman year, as a starter, I tear my ACL. I partially tear my MCL, and I rupture both my meniscus. So my medial and lateral meniscus completely torn, flipped. They had to reconstruct them. And so what typically would have been a ACL surgery would have took a couple hours at most, ended up being an 8-hour surgery to basically reconstruct my whole knee, and that was I think that was, man, one of the major times that God had got my attention, was right then and there, just thinking, man, my livelihood could be gone. I was thinking I was a high profile athlete coming out of high school. I was doing really well in college, Big Ten school, turning into a fan favorite, turning into the national spotlight. And there I was laying on the ground with my livelihood just slipping from my fingers. And so I remember at the hospital, laying in bed, crying out to God, you know, all that kind of stuff, and I think in that moment, I wouldn't have known this or said this back then, but I think basketball was taken off the top shelf in my life. I think in that moment, it wasn't completely removed as an idol in my life, but it definitely got taken down a step, right? Because the attention, the attitude I had toward it before that moment was ridiculous. You asked me who I was a basketball player. You asked me what I wanted to do. I wanted to play basketball, be in the NBA. But after that, man, it was just the simple love of the game took over. I loved playing basketball. I loved being with the guys. I loved the sport, the camaraderie. A couple of the awards that I won, I never won like the MVP awards or nothing like that, but I got the Chris Street Award, which is the University of Iowa award for the I don't know, it's like a sportsmanship award, right? The guy that has the toughness, has the camaraderie, builds sportsmanship amongst the teammates, all that kind of stuff. The glue guy holds things together. That was me. Even Big Ten nationally, got the Big Ten Sportsmanship Award 2 years in a row, And so it's just like, that's how God kept me in the game, allowed me to do that. And so an injury that should have taken me away from the game, just point blank right there, he allowed me to continue, play the rest of my career, those 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior year, and even allowed me to play 6 years pro overseas, which is unreal. It's a complete miracle. It should have never been. Any kind of basketball after that freshman year should have never happened, let alone 6 years of professional basketball playing overseas, So it was great. My first year out, I played in Iceland. Meanwhile, I met my wife in college.
Come on.
I can't blow by that. Hold on now.
I'm about to text Trish and be like,
She was about to get a word
come
after
on,
this.
dog.
I'm about to text Trish and be like, hey,
He ain't even.
Drop.
So met my wife in college, man. Funny story. I'm in ministry now, but this kind of started that train. I guess, never really linked it back that far, but I guess that's really the truth in it all. She was actually from Ames, Iowa, which is a rival city of Iowa City, Iowa, because Ames, Iowa has Iowa State. Iowa City, Iowa has University of Iowa. She was an Ames kid, born and raised. Her whole family, diehard Cyclone fans, right? And she's playing basketball, wanting to go to Iowa State, ends up getting a scholarship from Iowa. Takes that leap. It's really hilarious. They had this family photo of her before she goes to University of Iowa, and she's the only one with Iowa gear on. And she's sitting in the middle. All the family's looking at her all crazy, right? Pointing at her and, doing all this kind of crazy stuff. And it's just so cool, man. But anyway, she ended up bridging that gap. She comes to University of Iowa. She's 2 years behind me. So when I was a junior, she was a freshman. But with her comes a church plant from Ames. Right. With her comes a church plant. They start a college ministry there. And that college ministry ends up blowing up. It becomes being a part of the city, Iowa City. Right. And so I meet her. We're going to FCA together for a while. She introduces me to some of the pastors at this church. I end up meeting them, getting a relationship with them, moving Trisha into her apartments, in and out of, and one of the pastors ends up taking me under his wing, Jeff Thune. He actually married my wife and I. Mm-hmm. And so he's no longer a part of the church in Iowa City now, but great guy. We still are in communication with one another. So we were doing, he kind of discipled me a little bit in that. We had a football player who was also being discipled by Jeff at the time. And so we spent a lot of our time together at the offices, going out to eat. I remember they had their first kid, and I was like the first person to the hospital, wouldn't held their baby Coda. I remember that, man. She may not remember me, man, but I remember her. But it was an amazing time. That was my first time actually getting a chance of a true, I'll say, Christian fellowship outside of when I was in Kansas City. Was when that church came down. I remember trying to go to different churches in Iowa City, and none was working. And coming from the context where I was, be bluntly honest, only a girl would be able to get me to get in that context that I was that I was in. I just knew nothing about it, right? Just that kind of evangelical Western Christian culture. Like I didn't know anything about it. All I knew was, from Southern Black Baptist Church to we were going to a multi-ethnic church by the time I was leaving high school, right there in Gladstone, Missouri, right outside of Kansas City. And so, met my wife there. We ended up dating. We were dating, I think, 1 year before I left to go overseas. And so we finished that year up. I go overseas, play 1 year in Iceland. I come back home from Iceland and we get engaged. Down in Florida, you can look that up on Facebook. We did a video. I read a poem to her. She had no idea, completely surprised. I remember asking her father if I could marry her. We were at the lake. They have a little lake house, family lake house, early in the morning. Woke up, knew it was on my mind, went down.
Knees shaking?
Knees shaking, bro. Didn't even know what I was going to say. And ended up, whatever I could muster up out of my mouth, man, I just asked, hey, I really like your daughter. I really like your daughter.
Hey, she's so nice.
Can I marry her? And he's like, yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't quite like that, but it was something like that. It was something like that. And I was like, I remember being surprised that his answer was so quick and that it was a yes. And he was like, what would you think I was going to say? And I was like, I don't know. At least ask me something. I don't know. But anyway, we end up, so we get engaged that year. I go overseas. I play basketball in France. I come back from France, and we get married that year. And so we spend the next 4 years of our life overseas. Me playing basketball. She played some pro basketball over there as well. We ended up having 2 kids while I was in France. Miss Kata Bell, she's 5. Riley, she is 3. And then I got done playing basketball in 2017. Called myself retiring from the sport. And it was actually that time, we won't have a lot of time to go into this, but that's when basketball was really derailed as my God. Like that foundation was shaken extremely in 2017, and I think was a catalyst for God to truly grasp my heart, right? And when his voice that's always calling, follow me, follow me, follow me, was when it was the most audible, And I think that's what brings me to where I am now. So it's 2020, 2017. We get back to America. A lot of different things play out there, discerning some calls. And 2019 ended up finding myself into full-time vocational ministry. And so I've been doing that for a year.
Man.
Yeah.
That's a good word right there. Come follow me. Come follow me. How did you even now we think through ambassador. What's the heart behind it?
Yeah. Man, the ambassador, it's a project I've been thinking about for some time now, It's the heart behind ambassador is, to put it simply, is reconciliation. And specifically racial reconciliation. There's no doubt, everybody can see it, that in America, the racial tension that's been here on our soil from the beginning, that was in thought first, and then it was actually in action, in the genocide of the Native Americans, and then with the slavery of the Africans, and then so forth. You can take a walk through history, and you can just see this seedbed of racism that just formulated everything, And so I think the Bible was still being preached, and people were still coming to Christ, but they were clearly listening to a truncated gospel. They were coming to a fraction of who Jesus Christ is, right? When they heard the name Jesus Christ, when they heard what the gospel was, they weren't hearing the love of neighbor in that proclamation, right? When we think of what God calls us to, he calls us in the great commandment to one, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength, right? And then the second thing is love your neighbor as yourself, right? It's one commandment, two parts to one commandment. You can't divorce one and have the other, right? They don't exist. And so if that's true of the gospel, man, my heart bleeds for that, right? And so what does that look like for us as Americans? It looks like racial reconciliation. You know, when we take the divides that we see in the scripture and we apply those to where we are now, particularly in what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, you know, with the ministry of reconciliation, we get something tangible that we can hold on to and put into play here where we are. So that's my heart.
Yeah. Jarryd, that's a good word that we all need to cling to, even as we think of being people who know and love Jesus, have a heart that beats for that, racial reconciliation.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you for listening to the Ambassador Podcast. If you would like to hear more episodes or get more information about the Ambassador, please check out our website at www.weareambassador.com.